about yourself and like what you're interested in?
So I'm Avantika and I'm in grade 10 currently, and I'm interested in gene editing and its applications in medicine because medicine has advanced so much over the years and we always see new advancements almost every day. But I think it's really important to consider what gene editing can do to speed up this process and potentially solve diseases like cancer, Parkinson's disease, and so much more.
Okay, so gene editing, it involves DNA, am I right?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, so could you just give us like a general overview of like what DNA is and how that is related to gene editing?
Okay, so gene editing basically is a set of technologies that allow scientists to modify, add, or delete specific genes within an organism's DNA. And this can be done not only with the human genome, but with also like any other species. And these technologies can basically be used to correct genetic defects, improve agricultural traits, or even treat diseases by altering the genetic makeup of cells. So currently there are a lot of gene editing technologies, but the most common is CRISPR-Cas9. So that's kind of like you can think of it as molecular scissors. So you can choose where to cut the DNA, and you can allow and it allows for targeted changes. So gene editing can be designed to find and target specific sequences of DNA. For example, in CRISPR-Cas9, a guide RNA is used to direct the Cas9 enzyme to the exact location of the gene. You can cut the gene, which CRISPR would do, and it can be applied in medicine, agriculture, research, and many other fields.
Yeah, so I think that's really interesting. Do you know like any specific implications of gene editing on like certain diseases or conditions that we have here today?
Yes, actually, I have been looking into cancer more like thoroughly because that's my interest. So gene editing, like right now, is predominantly focused on genetic disorders. For example, like recently, I believe last year in 2023, the FDA approved two genetic treatments, one from CRISPR Therapeutics and another one from Vertex Pharmaceuticals to treat sickle cell anemia, which is basically a mutation in the HBB gene that causes sickle cell disease. Because so basically this works by using a patient's bone marrow to reintroduce normal hemoglobin production. Moreover, gene editing can also be used in cystic fibrosis, cancer as well. And currently, gene editing is used in CAR T cell therapy, which is currently what I'm focusing on. So, CAR T cell therapy is, well, like expanded. It's chimeric antigen receptor T cell therapy. So, by modifying T cells to express specific receptors, CAR T cell therapy enhances the immune system's ability to target and destroy cancer cells. It's also used in infectious diseases like HIV and hepatitis B, and neurological diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and heart diseases, blindness, and so much more.
Oh, okay, so like gene editing sometimes can be used if, say, like your parents had a certain condition and they unfortunately pass it off to you, but through gene editing you can like change those genetics.
Exactly. And actually, like one topic of debate is genetically modified embryos or babies. And so you can gene edit an embryo and you can like give it like whatever characteristics you want, like your eye color, or like you can change the gene. And this will replicate for like the whole generation of, well, people. So that's why it's kind of very controversial.
Okay, that's really interesting. Well, obviously, if you could change so much about yourself and the embryos, there's obviously going to come with ethical issues. So, what are your views or thoughts on like the ethical concerns related to gene editing?
So, I definitely agree with all the ethical considerations of gene editing and whatever has been brought. to scientists' concerns, because there are a lot of ethical concerns. For example, germline editing, like I talked about, the DNA of embryos and changing that is an ethical concern because it can create unintended long-term effects on the human gene pool. And even like equity and access, because gene editing, once it becomes more mainstream and widespread, that would be great for everyone. But when it's introduced in medicine, like more commonly, only people that can afford it basically would be able to have access to this, and so that creates a huge gap between marginalized communities and people or low income populations without, well, basically these life-saving technologies. And also gene editing has unintended consequences because we've only just started to learn about it, right? And so gene editing now could lead to unintended mutations or harmful consequences. For example, an edited gene could have side effects that can only become apparent after many years, causing new diseases or genetic problems. And so I agree with all of these ethical considerations, and definitely it's something that must be considered. But I do believe that gene editing is the future and it should be pursued and it shouldn't be stopped. Obviously, after a lot of research and working through these therapies, will it be more safer? But it shouldn't like fall into the wrong hands, or it should just be more worked on.
Okay, so you're saying like right now it might not be as developed, but later on, after the proper research has been put into it and the proper like boundaries surrounding it, then it'll be usable, and you think that's like a great future for healthcare.
Yeah. And we also need like ethical frameworks, and they have to change and evolve and potentially address like introducing new policies or laws um, is important to ensure that these technologies balance scientific advancement and social responsibility.
So just bringing this topic back around cancer, could you just describe about like what cancer is and how that relates to gene editing?
Right. Uh, so basically, cancer is a disease that affects many people around the world, and it's very prevalent, and almost 1 in 2 or 1 in 3 people get cancer. So recently, my research was focused on gene editing and cancer. And well, cancer basically is a group of diseases that is characterized by the uncontrolled growth and spread of abnormal cells in the body. So normally the body cells grow, divide, and die in an orderly fashion. But when these mechanisms of cell growth and death fail, then abnormal cells begin to multiply, and this is what we call cancer, and it leads to the spread of tumors or cancerous cells to other parts of the body. And cancer can occur in almost any tissue of the body. Um, so which is why it's so important to be able to stop this. And currently we don't have a cure, but gene editing is there, and it has a huge potential to potentially cure cancer. So gene editing, like using CRISPR, like gene editing, is a significant tool in cancer research and treatment because it allows for the precise modifications of the DNA of a cell. So gene editing technologies like CRISPR-Cas9 can be used to target and modify the DNA of cancer cells directly. For example, we can knock out oncogenes, which involves the editing of genes that drive cancer cell proliferation. Or we could correct mutations in tumor suppressor genes, like P53, which is often mutated or deleted in cancer. By editing these genes, gene therapy can restore their function and allow them to control cell growth. And enhancing immune cells to fight cancer, that's what I was focusing on more in my research, especially CAR T cell therapy. So our immune system has something called T cells. They are immune cells that work to fight cancer, and there are two types: helper T cells and cytotoxic T cells. the cytotoxic T cells fight directly with cancer, but they have their limitations because they aren't as effective as we know, and they have a lot of problems like exhaustion, and a lot of things. So CAR T cell therapy involves modifying a patient's T cells to express a receptor that targets specific cancer cells, and these receptors are synthetic. And the T cells are then reintroduced into the body where they can attack cancer cells more effectively. And gene editing can actually be used to enhance CAR T cell therapy as well, because there are problems, like I mentioned, exhaustion, the tumor microenvironment, and a lot more. So basically, gene editing can be used in all of these forms to prevent cancer. And like considering the ethical considerations and everything, like off-target effects, which basically means that gene editing can lead to unintended edits of the DNA or germline editing, which changes the genes of many generations, is very important. But talking about cancer, it's been used with CAR T cell therapy, knocking out oncogenes, correcting mutations, and CAR T cell therapy and tumor suppressor genes.
Okay, so if I'm right, in normal, if T cells are not like targeting cancer cells, they're just finding cells that are affected by cancer and they're just destroying them. But basically, gene editing, you're giving them like superpowers, kind of.
Basically, yeah.
Okay, so another thing you mentioned before was you said that we could actually go and edit the cells that had cancer, like their DNA was messed up. You said we could go edit
Yeah.
those cells' genes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting. Do you think this is the path to go on for cancer, or are there any other alternatives that you think might rise as well?
Um, so, actually, I personally think that this is the path to go on. Um, because currently the treatments that we have are either a hit or miss. They will work or they won't work. And this leads to so many deaths, like almost every single day, every week, every month. And with our rate of development, sure, like we are developing, and every day there are new advancements, but simply it is. I personally don't think it's enough. And with gene editing, I think that cancer treatment can be revolutionized because now we have new tools to target cancer cells directly and to enhance the immune system's ability to fight cancer and to develop personalized therapies. Um, and so with this potential and with this power, it's purely I believe that this is the future because and like not only in cancer but it can be applied to so many other diseases because gene editing can allow researchers to target the genetic mutations that drive cancer. um, it can enhance immunotherapies, like for example CAR T cell therapy, and it can even prevent cancer. Um, right, like it's not like it doesn't work only after cancer, like only after you find the cancer, but it can also help prevent cancer in the person, in the individual. For example, people that have genetic mutations, those mutations can be corrected, and if we edit like those mutations and those genes before the cancer develops, it can offer preventive treatments. And personalized medicine honestly is also on the rise now, and this relates to gene editing because we can provide more effective treatments than one size fits all because each person experiences cancer in a different way, and gene editing allows us to have the ability of treating people based on their own set of I would say symptoms, how they're facing the cancer or any disease in general. And gene editing is also currently, even though it's not fully developed, it's incredibly precise. So with more research and with more developments, we can increase the success rate of gene editing to like almost perfect because nothing is perfect, right? and it will become more accessible, it will become more cost efficient. So I honestly think it is the future. It will play a crucial role in future cancer treatments.
Okay, well, obviously we see that gene editing is very important to cancer. Are there any like other implications for gene editing aside from treating disorders? Like I think you mentioned something about like changing the genes in like plants to make them more efficient.
Yeah. Uh, So gene editing doesn't like obviously doesn't only work with humans, so it can also be used in agriculture and crop development. For example, currently gene editing is changing the way we produce food by enabling um, precise modifications to plants, which can improve yield, disease resistance, and nutritional content. So, like, I guess like a few years ago, like these like square watermelons or like watermelons without seeds are like really popular. I mean, that's all gene editing. That's modifying the genes of these crops and these fruits. And so in agriculture, gene editing can be used to develop crops resistant to pests and diseases, and they can have an increased drought tolerance. So, by editing specific genes, scientists are developing crops that are more tolerant to drought or extreme weather conditions, which can be super beneficial in areas that don't receive as much rainfall. And then it can help alleviate food insecurity, and we can increase the nutritional content of crops. And it's so these crops are actually called biofortified crops that are more nutritious. And so areas that are not suitable for the production of a lot of crops, we can increase the nutritional content of one crop so that people don't lack the nutrients that they need to survive. And gene editing can also be used in livestock and animal biotechnology. So this means that we can increase disease resistance in livestock. So we can make animals more resistant to diseases that affect them. We can improve their productivity. So we can enhance traits like growth rate, muscle development, and reproductive performance. Obviously, this has its own ethical implications, and I don't exactly, um, I'm not exactly the with the with the increase of the productivity of livestock, because that means that we're basically modifying these animals for our own benefit. But we can also use gene editing to improve animal welfare by reducing the need for painful procedures, such as dehorning cattle. You can take that as an example. And we can also conserve endangered species. And also with the rise of climate change and impacts on many countries, for example, the deforestation of the Amazon rainforest or the drying of many lakes, environmental conservation can be done using gene editing with controlling or eliminating invasive species that threaten native ecosystems. For example, using, I believe it's called gene drives, to spread genetic changes in invasion species to limit their population. Coral reef conservation as well, which is so important because gene editing can be used to enhance the resilience of coral reefs to climate change and plant conservation as well. It can be used to preserve plant species at risk of extinction due to habitat destruction, and this can also be used with animals that are close to extinction.
Yeah, so like I just had another idea. Like we could maybe like gene edit certain plants to absorb more carbon dioxide as well.
Yeah, of course, that's also possible.
So, what are your thoughts on gene editing to like enhance your human capabilities, such as maybe not being able to feel pain or being able to live longer? Do you think we should go down that path, or should we just stick to fighting off like diseases and helping out like other global problems and not really like make ourselves
Hmm.
really better?
So I would say that editing human traits, um, Not exactly, but kind of falls into selective breeding. This is a very drastic example, but for example, in Nazi Germany, let's say there was a selection of people with their own individual characteristics. For example, people that were strong or tall, or just all of those considerations that were taken into place to basically create that regime. It kind Gene editing human traits kind of falls into the same line, because gene editing to enhance human capabilities, I believe it's also called human enhancement, is is currently being explored, and it's rapidly advancing, and it definitely does hold exciting potential, like you mentioned, for example, like becoming stronger, not being able to feel pain. So it can be used to like increase muscle mass and strength, or enhance endurance, um, improved bone density to reduce the risk of bone fractures, or cognitive enhancement to basically um, increase our cognitive abilities like memory and learning, IQ enhancement, and longevity. So, longevity is actually another field of science and is currently also being explored, like you said, to live longer. So, there so we can reduce so we can basically, like, there's a gene that causes our rapid aging, and like just like the way we grow, the way our cells grow, the way our body grows. So we can actually edit that gene and have anti-aging modifications, um, so we can change the regulation of the body's response to aging, such as those involved in the repair of DNA damage or the maintenance of stem cells, and we can have an extended lifespan, a resistance to diseases and environmental stress. But obviously, this does lead to ethical and social implications. I mean, I personally think that it's so cool that we can just choose whatever traits we want. Like, we can change our eye color, hair color, the way we look, and everything like that. But, for example, like I think, like we talked about before, designer babies. Um, Something that has come across, and that will definitely come across if it becomes a thing, is if you edit an embryo, um, when that embryo basically becomes like a living human child, would that child really like appreciate the changes that you made? I mean, it's not really their choice, and you kind of made those changes for them. So things like that is, I would say, should be explored, like with those ethical frameworks that we talked about before. And gene editing for enhancement could create significant disparities, because like we mentioned, like those with the amount of money to have access to these technologies, and those who don't could face like a and like this could create a huge barrier, as only like the wealthy or the privileged could have access to these technologies. This could also lead to concerns about I would say genetic discrimination, if you'd call it, where individuals with enhanced genomes could be treated differently in the workspace. Um, and the designer babies that we talked about could raise ethical concerns about the potential to commodify human life. It could lead to unintended consequences, a loss of genetic diversity as well. Because, I mean, like the drastic example before Nazi Germany, that also led to a loss of culture of diversity. And so a loss of genetic diversity could also occur if we do use gene editing for human enhancement. And consent is very important because, like we talked about before, germline editing is something raises concerns about whether future generations could consent to genetic modifications made in their DNA or not. So we definitely need regulation and so regulation and oversight is very important, and regulatory frameworks is also very important. I personally think it would be so like super cool if we could do that, and I think if we do go forward with this, consent of both parties is important, of both the person that's administering the technology and the person that's being, I guess, modified. So that's definitely important. But I do see it being our future. And it's important to work out the ethical dilemmas.
Wow, so I feel like you can kind of turn life into a video game now.
Yeah, well, like pretty much.
Yeah. So what do you think are some like common misconceptions about gene editing that are out there in the public that kind of degrade the image of gene editing or maybe like make it seem not as good as it is?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say a lot of common misconceptions. Um, I would say one is that uh, gene editing is only for humans. I guess like that's what a lot of people think because when we say gene editing, that's what we think of. But then it's not only for humans because gene editing is also being applied to animals, plants, microorganisms, and it has applications in agriculture, environmental conservation, and biotechnology. So I guess when we say genetically modified organisms or genetically modified crops, that's when we start to think about how gene editing is used in places other than human advancement. But otherwise, that's one common misconception. Otherwise, another one, I think a lot of people, another misconception is that gene editing could lead to um, playing God. So like a common this is also like an ethical concern because the idea that gene editing especially when applied to humans is like akin to playing god is definitely not true, and some people fear that it could lead to humans taking control over natural processes in ways that are unnatural or unethical. And when people think about gene editing, I think like they always think of the extreme, like having like five like six fingers or like two heads. I think we always think of like we always like I think as humans like in general we're just like pessimistic. We always think of like the worst thing that could happen. So that's so like like just like thinking that gene editing can like only be used to change physical traits is also another misconception because gene editing can be used to treat genetic disorders, well like currently cancer and a lot of other things, which I think is important to consider, and that kind of degrades the image of gene editing because a lot of people now perceive it as bad. I mean, there are two sides to the coin, but a lot of people with like the widespread of gene editing and like with more people talking about it, a lot of people think that it's just negative and completely will change the human race and will not give us a preference in like how we look, how we feel, and everything like that. But that's definitely not true. So I think that's also another thing to um, another thing that people should consider. Yeah.
Yeah, so this brought up something I read in a book. I just wanted to bring it up, not completely related, but I think the reason why us humans we usually think about the downside of things is because in the early days we'd be much better off like worrying if a snake was beneath our bed than if like 10 bananas would appear tomorrow.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that causes some problems with these very high possibility technologies, but sometimes the social image gets degraded. So
Yeah.
if you could just have one message to the world, if you could all of a sudden tell everyone something about gene editing, what would it be?
That's a good question. Honestly, if I had to say, if there, like, I had to say, like, one message, I would say that the future holds immense potential, and gene editing holds incredible promise to transform medicine, agriculture, and countless other fields. And it gives us the potential to cure genetic diseases, improve food security, and just improve the human race. Even though we think about how bad it can be, we must think about what good it can do to the human race. How it can benefit you, how it can benefit me, how it can benefit all of us. Because it won't only change the way we eat to benefit us, but it will increase our resistance to diseases. It can increase longevity and it can basically change our future. It can change who we are as humans, and the future of gene editing is in our hands. Not as scientists or policymakers, but as a global community committed to using this technology for the betterment of all. So I think it's important that we move forward with a respect for the complexities of life and for human advancement.
Oh yeah, that's really interesting. I think that's a really impactful message. Well, you summed pretty much a lot of things up. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap it up?
I think your questions were very thorough, and I think that's it from me.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining me on this episode. It was great to have you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
All right, have a good day. Bye.
You too. Have a good night.